I am Chris Ronayne, and I'm president of University Circle Incorporated. I am pleased to welcome you, 130 strong we hear, to our discussion tonight about the Fine Arts Garden here in University Circle, right in front of the Cleveland Museum of Art on Euclid Avenue. And this is titled tonight, the Fine Arts Garden Extension Project. And this is a public meeting that is a requisite for public funding as per Cuyahoga County, which we are glad Cuyahoga County has offered that provision, because it's important to get engaged citizen input into projects like these, because for our city, for University Circle, as you look right in the background of this slide, we are at Main and Main here on Euclid Avenue in the crossroads of Stokes and Stearns and MLK. And we take very seriously the finishings that we do in the area of University Circle, because it's such a public interfacing place. Just a few comments as I get into introducing our moderator, who will be Elise Jablonski, the planning director here at UCI. Again, I'm very pleased, one, that you've joined us. We heard 130 of you are registered tonight. I think if there is an upside, we're all a little bit tired of Zoom. I don't want to speak for everybody. I'll speak for myself on that, but I'm sure many of you can relate. But one of the upsides is actually public engagement, that we can get more of you together from further distant places on nights like tonight, which frankly turned out to be a tough travel night wherever you were. So hope you're inside and just connecting with us as you are from Zoom. That, I just wanted to say thank you for joining us. Secondly, wanted to thank our partners. This is a project about placemaking that is really of community benefit. And there isn't an entity on this line that had to do this. They're all doing this because this is about the betterment of a place here in Cleveland, at this corner of Cleveland and University Circle, Sewer District. Thank you, Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, for your commitment to a cleaner lake, for your commitment to the Doan Brook Watershed, for your commitment to cleaner water systems everywhere here, and leading by example as national model from right here in Northeast Ohio. Thank you, NEORSD. I want to thank the Cleveland Museum of Art. Jeffrey Streen is going to join us in a minute. We are grateful. If you've looked around the CMA of late, whether it's at this south-facing public space from the lagoon to the work that's been done at the Greenway just north of the lagoon, to the most recent addition at the Smith Gateway on MLK as you approach the west end of the Cleveland Museum of Art, or the work that they've done to the north around Wade Oval. It's been spectacular. We go back with the Cleveland Museum of Art to 1916 with that first edition, and really the culture of the museum has never quit. It's never quit on the idea that on top of having a world-class museum, let's have a world-class place in the surrounds. And so the first director, as Jeffrey's heard me say all too many times, Frederick Whiting, made a commitment with Hubble and Benz, the original architects, to plan around the place. And I think right on through all of the directors who've served this museum, up and through William Griswold, we've been lucky to have people who care about the surrounds. And it really shows lately around the Cleveland Museum of Art, where the exterior is as beautiful as the interior. So thank you, Cleveland Museum of Art, for such an extraordinary contribution over these last years, specifically to Cleveland and to University Circle. There have been some funding partners who've been a part of this, but before I go there, I also want to thank our friends at Land Studio. If they're out there, they placemake all over town. Greg Peckham and his team do a wonderful job. Thank you, Land Studio, for bettering our community. I think we can all appreciate outdoor space, whether it's the placemaking you do or the institutions I've just referenced, or the work lately of the metro parks. All in, everybody has really actually coincidentally equipped a city like Cleveland for a time like now, where we can enjoy the great outdoors, we can enjoy great public space with partners in the nonprofit world like Studio. You've really risen. The foundation, who originally convened us in this effort and is literally putting their money where their mouth is by locating in place just down the street in the Midtown Huff neighborhoods of the Midtown corridor. Again, our design partner, William Curry, has been with us every step of the way. We're grateful for, again, somebody who raises the bar in this town and continues to bring value to public space and placemaking. And there's a lesser known entity called the Holden Parks Trust that was a legacy of many administrations ago in the Voinovich administration, who left to us the wonderful legacy of placemaking in Rockefeller Park around the cultural gardens, around the Wade Lagoon, around the Rockefeller Lagoon, and basically the parks of Gordon Park, Rockefeller Park, Wade Park have all been improved thanks to the treasury of the Holden Parks Trust, which puts funds into placemaking every year in this stretch and makes it a better place every year. So NERC, CMA, Land Studio, Cleveland Foundation, Holden Parks Trust, and of course our team here at UCI appreciate the everyday efforts of UCI to make this a better place for people. As people come to Cleveland, they see this place and they're really amazed by the green spaces and public places around it. And that includes our own university, Case Western, who contributed an extraordinary effort to the Nord Greenway. So we're about extending that today. We're going to talk about a corner that matters right here on the Health Tech Quarter at Euclid Avenue. We know that we front the great Fine Arts Garden, the Great Lagoon, and we know that the work from again, Hubble and Benz on forward to the Olmsted Brothers firm that worked on a beautiful place that really, again, elevated a place like Cleveland through City Beautiful movement. And now today our partners at Sasaki, who have been just incredible partners in connecting this place, University Circle, to all of its neighborhoods, first with the Case Western Master Plan, and then the micro plans like you're going to see today from our partner, Matt Langen, who's going to talk about the design elements of this from Sasaki. Again, you've been terrific. You were here with us and helped design the landscape of the Euclid Corridor, and you've stayed with us all the way through. So our partners on the panel today that Elise is going to run through include Doug Lapata from the NARSD. Doug's been on Project Clean Lake and the Doan Brook Deep Tunnel. Seems like for a while with us, Doug, but we're grateful for the everyday details you put into this. Jeffrey Streen, who's going to talk about the Cleveland Museum of Art connections to these public spaces and green space, who's really led this with Dr. Griswold to really improve the surrounds around the museum, but moreover, really in our city, just places that whether you're in to visit the museum or not, you can just amble through great parks that make this such a special place in the city. And then finally, again, Matt Langen, who's going to talk about this design in front of us from Sasaki and connecting all these strands that he's put together with the master planning that the Sasaki firm has done. So I'm going to give this back to Elise, but with one last shout out to all of you on tonight. Thanks for being so engaged. As former planning director, it always warmed your hearts when people were out in seats for public meetings because they cared. And tonight I'll extend that same idea that even if we can't see all of you tonight, we're grateful that you zoomed in tonight and you're with us because you care about Cleveland. So take it away, Elise Jablonski, and we'll get the show started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that welcome and overview. I'm going to turn it over now to Doug Lapata from Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, just to give an update on the construction that's happening on site now with the Doan Valley Tunnel project. Thanks, Doug.
All right, thanks, Lise. Just to give you a little update on where we're at with our project. This is part of our Doan Valley Tunnel project. This is a consent decree project. We originally bid it for $143 million, and we started in July of 2017. And as you know, maybe the hub of our activity has been over in the Ambler Park site, but one of the branches of the tunnel comes over towards this, what we call our MLK2 site, towards the University Circle area. I'm happy to report all the tunneling is complete. So we had one long 18-foot diameter tunnel that went all the way to Superior and 1/15th that came out of the Ambler Park site. That's done. And then we went south on the Wood Hill Tunnel with an 8.5-foot diameter tunnel. And then we came over here to this MLK leg, which was another 8.5-foot diameter tunnel. And the reason we had to be here was the Doan Brook, which Matt will show you in later slides, actually runs right underneath this site. And so we had to pick up the combined sewer overflow problem right before those flows hit the Doan Brook and pollute the Doan Brook. So that was our reason for kind of being in this triangular site to begin with. So overall, this project will capture 365 million gallons of combined sewer overflow each year that would have normally gone out to the lake through Doan Brook to the lake. And instead will go into the tunnel, get captured, drop into our deeper tunnel system, and then get pumped out after the storm event is over, and then it gets full treatment at our easterly treatment plant. So we're happy to kind of be part of this team. We're happy to kind of be ready to start restoring sites. So right now in our schedule, we're about finished with the construction of the at this site with the concrete shafts, and we're into more of the mechanical electrical at this site. So it's more of a, there's a gate control that controls the flow into the tunnel here. So we have to finish up that work. And we're doing that over this winter, and basically in the spring we'll be done with that. And then we'll be ready to introduce flow into the tunnel by next summer. So that's why we're talking about the restoration now, getting the plans together so that we can try to at least seamlessly turn this into from a construction site into a nice restoration for the community to enjoy. So I'll turn it back over to Elise at that point.
All right, thank you, Doug. I'm now going to turn it over to Jeffrey Streen from the Cleveland Museum of Art. There were some questions about whether or not Doug had slides. There weren't slides for Doug's comments, but Matt will go over both some background slides that'll provide some visuals that might help to clarify some of the comments Doug made, as well as slides for the design. So Jeffrey, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Elise. Good evening. My name is Jeffrey Streen, and I am here tonight representing the Cleveland Museum of Art and Bill Griswold. This will be the second time that we've partnered with the Regional Sewer District. The most recent project was the Smith Family Gateway, and they really contributed about half of that project to about half of that project. So they deserve a lot of credit for it. We began, and I'm really the other thing. All I need to do tonight is to introduce Matt Langen. And so we have been working with Sasaki and Associates since 2001, when we began redesigning the terraces around the 1916 building. And then again, with the Greenway project that the university spearheaded, that we partnered with them on. And then the Eastville project, when the School of the Arts came down, we decided to turn that into the university and the museum decided to turn that into a park, and they designed that as well. And then finally, we knit the whole thing together into a landscape master plan that Matt might be able to mention a little bit tonight, that is now kind of makes sense out of the entire area. Some of the projects that have already happened, like Greenway and the Smith Family Gateway, and the restoration of the Holden steps. And now we're about to look at this small piece of what is legally the Fine Arts Garden, but not really part of its design. So without further ado, Matt Langen, he's with Sasaki and Associates, and we have so enjoyed working with him, and he's probably more designed or restored more landscape in Cleveland than I think anyone I could think of. So Matt?
Great, thanks Jeffrey and everyone else for the introduction. My name is Matt Langen. I'm a Senior Associate Landscape Architect at Sasaki, and as Jeffrey said, I'm at this point kind of an honorary resident of Cleveland, and have been working there on and off, mostly on since 2014, and hope to continue to do so as we go forward. I'm going to go through a series of slides now. I know there's a couple folks in the comments that aren't able to see the screen, but I think we're getting that resolved. My plan is to go through a series of slides that identify what you see here on the screen, give you a very abridged regional and historic context that we're working in, explain a couple previous planning and design studies throughout history in this area, but then focus most of my time on our design approach for the specific parcels we've been talking about, and then go through a series of concept plans. And when we go through the concept plans, I think it's important for everyone to understand that our charge, Sasaki's charge in this effort, was to establish a vision for what's possible on this site, not necessarily to have a design that's going to be built as shown. And so this is the perfect opportunity in the design process to seek feedback from the general public and from stakeholders to make sure that we're incorporating your input in the final designs for these areas. And so that's partially the purpose of this conversation today. And then we'll end up, once I go through those concept plans, with a discussion about and answer some questions if we have some time. Starting with the regional and historic context, there have been a series of studies done in the Doan Brook corridor over the last 50 years. interestingly and somewhat unexplainably, all of them identified this zone that we're talking about today, our study area, as an unfinished missing link between, or as part of this corridor. And what's interesting is you see it here. I'll blow it up a little bit for you there. You can see Wade Park is to the north of Euclid. And then the corridor continues to the south, as part of Ambler Park, to the south of Carnegie. But there is, in fact, a green space that connects those two. It's just never defined as a green space because it's kind of a hard place to get to. And you'll see that as we go through. Another interesting thing about this piece of the Doan Brook corridor is that the brook does actually flow below it. And if you're familiar with the area, you'll know that on occasion, probably more frequently than you would like, the area does flood. And there's a whole variety of reasons for that I'm sure Doug can speak to. But ultimately, the issue is that there's a lot of rainwater coming off the plateau and escarpment from Shaker Heights down into what's called the Lake Plain, which basically extends from Carnegie all the way out to Lake Erie. And there's just a big volume of water that's collected at this point. And so when it surcharges the existing infrastructure, this is one of the areas where you get some water on occasion. Here's another study of the Doan Brook watershed from the Watershed Partnership that, again, identifies this as one of the key missing links in the Doan Brook corridor. And zooming in a little bit closer, this is the study area that Sasaki's been charged with establishing a vision for. And like Jeffrey mentioned, there's an area to the north of Euclid, this little triangle parcel here, which was and is officially part of the Fine Arts Garden, although you wouldn't really notice that because the way that Chester Avenue bisects it here. And then there's a larger piece of Rockefeller Park, which is this little remnant leg here that does have some program in it today, but we can see a lot more potential for this site. And so we're going to look at both of these areas in greater detail. One important thing to note here is that the triangle parcel to the north of Euclid is a project that is partially funded, and the Museum of Art will be moving forward in developing that further this coming spring to take advantage of the renovation of this area after the sewer district clears out of that area from when they're done with the shaft project. The area to the south of Euclid is an area that we are establishing a vision for, but it's currently an unfunded project, and the time frame for redeveloping that is a little bit longer and not exact. And so there's opportunity, ample opportunity in both of these spots still to incorporate feedback before we finalize any designs. Looking at these areas at ground level here, you can see some existing photographs of, they're not quite as white as they are tonight, but they're existing photographs of the area. At this point, while I'm explaining some of these, Elise from UCI is going to generate a polling question or series of questions that you can answer as I'm explaining these slides about how or if you use this property today. So you might see that popping up now.
Everyone should see that pop up on their screen. If you could please take a moment to answer the question, how do you use the study area today? And you can select any and all that apply. So we'll just give a few moments and then share the results. We'll give another 10 seconds.
So some of these areas that you'll see, I'll point out, this is the very southern end of Rockefeller Park, across from the Cleveland School of the Arts at the intersection near Carnegie and Stearns. Here you can see the Harrison Dillard Trail starting, which ultimately works its way all the way out to Lake Erie. Another really important thing for us in this site is the beautiful mature tree canopy that exists there. If you're driving by at 40 or 50 miles an hour, you might not appreciate it as much, but in fact, there's a really great stand of existing mature trees on the property. There's also a series of sculptures public art and monuments that are scattered across the site as well, which we're going to work towards making a little bit more visible and accessible. So it looks like, Elise, we're seeing the polling results initially coming in, which is, I think, kind of what we expected.
Yeah, we'll have one more poll as Matt finishes up his drawing to get your insights on what improvements you'd most like to see. But as Matt shared, we see the highest use right now driving through the site, but also a significant number of people walking and biking and some not visiting as well.
So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, except to note that this area has a pretty interesting development history, including part of our study area was part of the original property that Nathaniel Doan purchased, which was ultimately the beginning of the city of Cleveland. And so it's a really important site historically, and there's been a lot of development here and there over the years. One of the biggest impacts, though, is the fact that Doan Brook has been culverted entirely through this reach, and through part of the Fine Arts Garden to the north of Euclid as well. And that is a reality that we can't undo at this point for a variety of reasons. But if we can shed light on it in some way, that's certainly something that we'd like to do as part of this visioning study. Like I mentioned, there has been some studies in this area in the past. In 1928, the Olmsted brothers, when they were developing the design for the Fine Arts Garden proper to the north of Euclid, considered this parcel here as part of the Fine Arts Garden, like we mentioned. But at the same time, the city of Cleveland was planning to expand Chester through all the way to Euclid, which is now MLK. In today's nomenclature, but the Olmsted Brothers firm decided at this point, when they realized that this Chester Avenue extension was imminent, that they weren't going to put a whole lot of investment in this triangle parcel, because their feeling at the time, and we know this through this correspondence that we gathered from the Library of Congress, their feeling was that this, if there's a 3 or 4 lane street bisecting the Fine Arts Garden, this is never really going to feel like part of the Fine Arts Garden, and so they never invested in it, and it remains with a low level of investment today, and that's something that we're trying to change. We see some opportunity here to get more use out of this public open space, and we'd like to do that. Jeffrey also mentioned that Sasaki has been working with the Museum of Art and other institutions on stitching together the public realm throughout University Circle. And here you can see a diagram of some of those projects, some of which have been realized, like the Nord Family Greenway, which cuts across Wade Park here, the Smith Family Gateway, just to the northwest, to the west of the museum, and a series of other small projects like the Holden Terrace down below. And now we're starting to zoom in a little bit more closely and are biting off implementation projects at a much smaller scale to fully realize this vision that we established with the museum back in 2018. So in terms of our specific approach for this study area, we first studied the adjacent land uses just to understand what the possibilities were for use of this space. And what's interesting is that there's a developing residential population in University Circle, which is interesting for public space use in University Circle. There's also the regional high schools, the Case Western and Case Quad, which is just to the east of Martin Luther King Drive. And then, of course, the Fine Arts Garden to the north. In those spaces, there is quite a bit of existing public open space. There's the Fine Arts Garden itself, Case Quad, like I mentioned. There's some sports fields, some plantings and bioswales that are performance-based plantings down to the southern edge of the property, and then some more sports fields over at the high schools. Now, interestingly, and this is just an observation, when we visit some of these areas, there's a perception generally, and this is, my personal observation, that some of these spaces don't feel entirely public. There's a sense of privacy of these spaces or private use of these spaces. And that's not at all what we know all these adjacent institutions want. Certainly they all encourage public use of all these facilities, but there's just this overarching feeling that some of them sometimes are private. And so we see the opportunity in this study area in between all these institutions to really make an inviting public space. So we also studied what our observations were of the desire lines, and generally the summary is that most people are using this to cut east-west across the site, and there's not a lot of use north-south of the Harrison-Dillard Trail. Part of that we think is just because of the condition of the trail, but another reason is that as the community continues to expand and the residential population expands, there will be more opportunities in the future for major north-south connections that don't quite exist today for whatever reason. There you can see the Harrison-Dillard Trail dashed in. We also looked at opportunities to cross all these busy streets at these intersections, and our conclusion ultimately was that there is a little bit of wiggle room to improve some of these crosswalks and maybe add one or two at some point in the future. We could potentially move or slide the crosswalk at Stearns Road a little bit to the south, or we could move the crosswalk, the mid-block crosswalk at Martin Luther King Drive a little bit north or south. But it really depends on how we ultimately develop the site. And this is important because what we've concluded is that from a regulatory standpoint, there's not a whole lot of opportunity at the moment to add crossings across these busy streets. So we have to almost entirely rely on those existing crosswalks with a little bit of wiggle room to improve the quality of them. And then we also looked at, I mentioned the mature tree canopy throughout the site. There's quite a bit of really great trees that we want to protect at all costs. They all appear to be in very good health. There's also a series of trees that we want to remove for exactly the opposite reason. There's some potential structural or hazard issues with them that we think it's most important to remove those. And then there's a series of other trees that we would like to assess more closely with a certified arborist to understand whether or not they're in good standing. And ultimately, that analysis concluded in this diagram, which is a series of areas in red here where we see opportunity to make interventions here without negatively impacting the trees that we want to protect. And so the areas in red are the areas that we've strategically identified to make improvements that will improve the quality of this space and encourage the public to use it. And you'll see as we go through and start to look at the concepts, we quite literally replicated those areas in red in the plans. So in terms of starting to identify a program for this, of course, our first step was to think about this a little bit in a vacuum, how us as designers could see future use of this space. We did, during our initial visioning design process, engage some of the adjacent stakeholders, the high schools, Case Western, of course, the Museum of Art and UCI are part of the team, and the residential developments right at Euclid. And so some of their feedback has already been incorporated into this planning. So our thought in starting to develop a program for the property is first to locate the programming or the opportunities to use the space right at those points where you are allowed to cross the streets at those crosswalks, to make it as easy as possible and then as inviting as possible for residential population to use residential functions, institutional properties to use institutional functions, or programming that would relate to student use, etc. One of those things is improving the Harrison-Dillard Trail, or the shared use path that cuts through the site from south to north. We looked at some precedents for what that might look like, what the standards should be in making improvements on that shared use path. We looked at, just like we did on the Nord Family Greenway, a series of flexible, large and small open spaces that can be used for large and small events to be determined at some point in the future. We looked at a series and variety of seating areas for different user groups throughout this study area. There was some desire from adjacent stakeholders for a dog park of a size that can accommodate quite a bit of dogs at one time. And so we took a lot of time understanding what the elements of a good kind of low maintenance and simple and clean dog park, what the elements of that are. And this is a precedent for what that might look like. We also, like I mentioned, wanted to shed light on the Doan Brook that runs below the property. And we know that it would be really hard and really cost prohibitive, in fact, to daylight that stream again, given the development around the site. So our thought here is to use a series of stormwater bioswales to call attention to the fact that we're capturing, treating, and filtering that water before we ultimately release it back into Doan Brook. And this is some precedence of what those bioswales might look like. And I'll point those out to you in our concept plan. We also were really enamored with this idea of a prospect or a hill that would give you really great views to certain parts of University Circle. And I'll show you that in a second, but here's some precedents for what that might look like. And this is the reason that we think that this might be a good idea. Is if I go backwards for a second, creating these bioswales requires us to cut into the existing landscape, and all of that earthwork that we'd be harvesting, we don't want to haul that off site for cost reasons. And so we thought we'd make an element out of it and create this prospect or hill that'll give you some great views. Two of those views, we've located this prospect feature strategically in a place where you would get great views of the 1916 axis of the Museum of Art across Wade Lagoon to the north. You'll see that down here. And then it's also on the axis of Euclid looking back towards downtown. So you'd be looking west down Euclid back towards downtown from the top of this hill. And you'll see that again in the concept plan. So here's our concept plan. And we're going to zoom into this in a second and show you, I'll walk through the design vision of each of these three areas. Area A is the Fine Arts Garden triangle parcel here that you see, which is north of Euclid. Just to orient you, this is Euclid coming through right here. This is Stearns coming down the bottom side of the property, and this is MLK going northbound back towards Euclid. And then we separated the Rockefeller Park piece into north and south, just so we could zoom in and show you a little that in greater detail. Starting at the Fine Arts Garden piece, you can see here the triangle parcel. Euclid is right here on your right. The focus of this is really to improve the intersection at Euclid and Chester to really make that a much more inviting plaza than what exists today, which is mostly just a lawn and planted area where the Marcus Hanna Monument, which you can see here, number 1, currently it's actually set back quite a bit further and is kind of recedes underneath the tree canopy. And it's a really beautiful piece of sculpture that we want to make sure is more visible. There's also what you can see here behind the Marcus Hanna Monument is this kind of more architectural planting of trees. You can see it here in a line. This, if I go back for a second, you'll see continues across Euclid into the Rockefeller Park side and completes the circle that used to be and continues to be, honestly, the historic right-of-way of University Circle when it was a circle and terminus for light rail coming up Euclid. And so we want to make sure that in the future condition, we still preserve that physically as a public right-of-way and draw attention to the fact that, this was the historic circle. So you can see that piece right here. Once you go through that threshold into the bigger open space, really, there's not a whole lot of significant improvements here. There was an idea of a walkway that gave you a little bit of a prospect over Wade Lagoon. And then there's a whole series of tree and shrub plantings in this kind of third of the project here, which are intended to just really beautify this corner and tie it in from a planting palette to what we're proposing and what we've recently implemented at the Cleveland Museum of Art, Fine Arts Garden, and Nord Family Greenway and Smith Family Gateway. And so the planting palette that's proposed here is consistent with the planting palette for those other pieces across Martin Luther King Drive. On a kind of more detailed level, there's, as Doug mentioned, there's one of their shafts, the sewer district's shafts project is right here, and there's some critical infrastructure that will need to be maintained moving forward. And so there's some access in and out of this area that's going to be required, and we've concealed that, and we'll show you that in some of the images as we go forward. Here you can see a view from University Circle looking northeast toward Wade Lagoon in the background. You can see here that we've taken the Hannah Monument and we've actually pulled it closer to the intersection as part of this visioning study, and we've added a plaza around that to make it much more of a gathering space. The architectural planting of trees behind, and then kind of the softer landscape expression beyond that. Here you can see that a similar view from ground level, looking at the Hannah Monument right in your foreground. One of the things that happened during the development of this vision is the Museum of Art was able to secure some funding to begin to implement this. And so we have been working with the Museum of Art to bite off the first couple of chunks of development of this parcel. Most of it is focused on this corner at Euclid and Chester, right down here. And there's some small modifications to it, but generally the spirit of the improvements are the same. And then the improvements over here where the sewer district will be vacating soon, the landscape improvements around there and access improvements will be part of the initial phase of development on this parcel. Shifting across Euclid to the south, what we're calling Area B, which is the northern piece of Rockefeller Park. Here you can see a series of proposed improvements starting at the intersection of Euclid and Stearns. You can see the Harrison-Dillard Trail is reconstructed in a slightly different alignment than it is currently. So that gets rebuilt through the northern piece of Rockefeller Park here. The architectural planting of trees continues around to complete that circle of University Circle. There's another historic monument, the Kossuth Monument. Lajos Kossuth was an advocate for democracy throughout Europe in the mid-1800s. He was the president of Hungary, and before and after was a real advocate of democracy throughout Europe. And so he's been part of this, he's been memorialized here in a major monument. Beyond that threshold of architectural planting, here you can see a big spiral. This is that prospect or hill that we were talking about. This is located on the axis. If you were to look this direction, you'd be looking right across Wade Lagoon. And if you look this direction, you'd be looking across or down Euclid back towards downtown. So this is that big hill, and you'll see that in perspective view in just a second. A big open lawn space here for larger gatherings. And then this kind of swoop here that you can see is one of those bioswales where we'd be digging down and directing all the water that falls on this part of the project into this area, which is a little bit of a nod to the fact that the Doan Brook runs right below here. Over at this edge, number 8, is the dog park, which is a pretty big footprint. It's about a 1/4 acre in size, and so it's a good size fenced off area that could operate as a dog park for the community. And then there's a series of other areas, a smaller linear plaza here, some bike racks and picnic tables. Number 10 and 11 here are opportunities for relocated sculpture or new sculptures to be added to the site. And then as we continue to shift, actually we'll look at the perspective views of this vision first, and then we'll shift to the southern end of the project. So here you can see another aerial view of Rockefeller Park. This is hovering over Euclid, which is in your foreground here, looking south down Stearns. Here's Stearns to the right here. You can see the spiral mound in the back here, the Kossuth monument here in the midground, and then the dog park would be back in the back here underneath the existing trees, back in this area down here. And lastly, the Harrison Dillard Trail in a slightly revised alignment that's running down parallel to Stearns towards Carnegie. Here you can see a similar view from ground level. So your back is to Euclid Avenue right now, the Kossuth Monument on your left, the Harrison Dillard Trail on your right, and then the spiral mound in the background here. And then another view from the larger open lawn area back towards the spiral mound. You can see the historic 1916 facade of the Museum of Art in the background. So that's that important axis that was created by the Olmsted brothers. And then a series of seating areas and art and sculpture kind of starting to create and enliven the space. And here is another view of the Harrison Dillard Trail would be on your right here. Your back is to Euclid, and there's a walkway that crosses the bioswale, which provides access to the dog park beyond. And like I mentioned, the dog park would be completely fenced in this area. And then shifting down to the very southern end of Rockefeller Park, here you can see a series of other improvements. The Cleveland School of the Arts is here on your left. This is Stearns. This is Carnegie down here to the bottom. And then this is MLK going in the northbound direction back towards Euclid. So here you can see the Harrison Dillard Trail coming through and terminating right here at the intersection of Stearns and Carnegie. You can see it passes through a new plaza space here that we imagine could get a lot of use from both the high school students across Stearns and the college students across MLK. And then another big, this kind of medium minty green here space is another major bioswale where we'd be collecting all the water from the site. Again, another subtle nod that the Doan Brook is running below. And we see a really great opportunity here for interpretive signage that helps you understand the urban hydrology cycle and the importance of this zone as part of the Doan Brook corridor. There's another sewer district shaft site right here, which we will need to provide some access to as well, but this access will be minimal. And then one last thing to note here before we look at some of these perspective views is there's an idea here to take one of the lanes of MLK northbound and give it back to the park site for a variety of reasons, but one of which is to just make that pedestrian crossing across MLK a little bit narrower and safer to cross to get to this improved public space at some point in the future. So here you can see a view of that new plaza space. This is looking north. MLK is in your background there. Another view of the plaza space in the background with the bioswale on your left and the Harrison Dillard Trail right here in your foreground. And that's it. And so at this point, Elise, maybe I'll hand it back to you and we could take some questions and answers.
Sure. Thank you, Matt. If I could ask you to pull up the conceptual plan, perfect, so that the full answer is there. We do have one more poll. Thanks again so much for joining us this evening. Just to get your thoughts on what elements you would most like to see added to the study area in the future. So you'll see a number of options there that Matt gave an overview of, and we'd ask that you pick your top 3 choices of some of the enhancements that were discussed today. I'll highlight again that Matt provided and presented a grander vision for this space that's still in early planning, but we are grateful to the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Sewer District, and Holden Parks Trust for supporting a first investment here in that triangle piece with an enhanced plaza and planting area. We are also working to fundraise to see if we can add back in some of those additional pedestrian pathways and also improvements to the Harrison Dillard Trail in that section. So that is ongoing. And I see that we have 34% of people voting, so I'll give it another 30 seconds. Again, your top 3 improvements you'd like to see here in the area: improved bikeway and shared use path, additional walking paths, additional seating areas, additional public art, additional lighting, additional planting areas, or the new dog park. And I see that some questions are starting to filter into the Q&A and the chat, and we will try to get those to as many of those as possible in our time this evening. And if we are not able to get to all of them, we will certainly follow up with answers. So I'm going to end polling and share our results. So it looks like we have a pretty dispersed voting here, with the highest vote getters being improvements to the bikeway and shared use path, with walking path, seating, public art and lighting all pretty much tied for second there, and dog park slightly behind. So with that, I will pull up and we will begin to address some of your questions here. Oh, well, I'm sorry about that. I just saw unfortunately just now that it's only letting us pick one option, but we got a sense of your priorities there. And there was a comment that better ADA access and user aids would be important improvements. So a great comment there. Thank you, Lenora. And it looks like those are that. Apologies all for that, it was only allowing one choice. There's a question here about parking being an issue in University Circle, and where would we propose people from the outside area would park. Matt, I don't know, if you would have any further thoughts here. Certainly the lane taken on MLK potentially could be a parking lane in the future. We know that as a part of the developments moving forward in the area, there are public parking garages planned as a part of those. There's some existing parking along MLK, but I don't know, Matt, Jeffrey, Chris, if you have any kind of additional comments or thoughts to that question about parking in this area. I'd also highlight we're glad that this area is well served by the regional bike path as well as multiple modes of transit, but understand the question certainly.
Elise, am I off mute?
You are.
Okay. Well, to everybody, first of all, legitimate question as it is, I'll just for a minute have fun with it. Dr. Toby Cosgrove used to say, I'll take any question as long as it's not about parking, when he was speaking from Cleveland Clinic. But we don't have that luxury. And in seriousness, let me start with an angle. That angle is, we are truly on the health tech corridor trying to create a place that first and foremost is livable from a pedestrian's standpoint. That we prioritize pedestrian way of life. We are talking about enhancements to this site with Sasaki and with CMA that incorporates more walking infrastructure, as you can see. Beasts like Chester haven't always been conducive to that, but we want this to be a pedestrian first environment. When we see the development at One University Circle to the southwest and the future development at Circle Square to the northwest, we are excited about the fact that we will have, upwards of 1,000 new residents in the area between those two buildings. And we want that to be the first priority. We are trying to continue to press for a transit-oriented community. Yes, on a linear transit-oriented line like the Health Line, but the confluence of the Health Line and 2 red line stops in the nearby walkable area. We're excited about that. We, when all said and done, are very focused on the final mile from transit, from wherever, from door, from transit, wherever you're coming from, or from a parking garage. So we have now a program called UGO that's run by one of our colleagues who's likely on the line today, Annie Pease, and that is essentially a transportation consortia that is acting as if it's a transportation management association, which is working to try to, again, connect every person who arrives, however they arrive, whether they're a resident already here or whether they are coming from other places elsewhere, that you park once, if you park at all, and that you get on the free shuttle service, free to you because of partners like CMA, CWRU, UH, and others, that we have this, literally park and ride system, that we have bike share, everywhere, and that we're a strong proponent of the scooter system as well. So all that final mile work that we've been working on is seemingly coming together. Now, when it's all said and done, the strong majority of visitors, as we witnessed from the 87% of you said you mostly view this corridor by car, that's correlative to the amount of people who are driving into the area, most often as single occupant drivers, but we've got 85+% people coming by car, probably into the 90s. And with that, we acknowledge that there are garages in every which direction. There will be a garage on the northwest, the southwest. There's a garage at the museum. We are parked. I won't say overparked, but we are parked pretty well. There are 35,000 parking spaces in the 1 square, 20-minute walking area, most of them accessible within a 5-minute walk. And so we are. So it's incumbent upon us to actually orient you with data to get you closer to knowledge of where you can park so you can get out and walk. And that's our commitment. So we will continue to communicate where parking is. We will continue to aggressively go after other modes of transportation and unabashedly and unapologetically go toward a walking environment, which this only further enhances that. When you see something like a dog park proposed, and it's not just high on your list of priorities, it's definitely those who are residents in the nearby area are asking for it. That's a sign of significant residential life that has grown and isn't just here on 9 months a year as students who we covet as well. So we got a lot of walkers, we got a lot of riders of different forms. We're going to prioritize them, but we're going to get to you who park here by more digital communication. You can go to ugocircle.com and you can find out more about it. Thanks. Oh, and by the way, Elise, sorry for the long-winded answer, but it's always the top question. One, to quote somebody who once quipped on the idea that, Winston Churchill, who said, we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us, or Frank Lloyd Wright and Lewis Sullivan's axiom, Lewis Sullivan, form follows function. Most people nowadays have said to us, form follows parking. And we don't subscribe to that completely. We think we can park people, get you to it, but not over park such that it's one big parking garage in University Circle. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. And thanks very much for that answer. I was able to relaunch the poll, and hopefully you should now be able to select your top 3 options. So we'll give some more time for that here, at least another 30 seconds. There was a question about whether the whole webinar will be available for future viewing. It will be. It's being recorded. We'll be sure to send out that link and make it available. There's also a comment about how the Wi-Fi and power outlets recently improved surrounding green spaces of the Greenway and Nash Walkway are great amenities. And another comment about restrooms being another amenity that's needed as the park spaces in this area get additional use. So we're currently at 53% of folks voting. I'll give it a few more moments here and check our chat just to make sure we don't have any additional questions to answer before we close out. Some suggestions for additional seating, agreement on restrooms, pathways connecting to RCA, or RTA, apologies, and rapid transit. And also comments about creating a feeling of openness and a feeling of safety. And Matt, I don't know if you want to just add some comments there in terms of the height and dimensions of the proposed idea of the viewing area. Any other place where kind of open views were, strongly encouraged in this area.
Sure. Yeah. So just first to address the question about accessibility, I should have mentioned this during the presentation, but we've designed this so that there are no stairs or ramps anywhere. Everything is a gently sloping walkway, including the spiral that will take you up to the top of the hill. That's all under 5%, a very gentle slope to get you up there. And so we designed this with multiple or maximum accessibility in mind. In terms of the comment about openness, I'm glad they brought that up. You can see here in the plan, the trees that we're trying to preserve are also the areas where we're trying not to provide any construction stresses to those trees. But there's two areas, the area here of the big open lawn and spiral, that will be a big open space that doesn't exist today. And then a big open space down at the southern end at the bioretention area and plaza area. Those two areas will be much more open and sunny in the future condition than they exist today. And then back to the north for a second, to address the comment you made, Elise, about the views. One of the things that we want to do here is we want to create those views back to the north and to the west in a way that you're looking under the tree canopy as opposed to making a formal clearing. And we want to do that because first of all, we want the circle itself to feel very strong and complete. But also, the Olmsted brothers, when they designed the Fine Arts Garden, they wanted Holden Terrace at the southern end of the lagoon to really feel like the terminus of that axis. And that's the way they've designed that. And so we want to respect that, but we also want to extend that visual connection under the trees back to have kind of a borrowed view of that historic axis. And so we think we'll be able to accomplish that given the height and maturity of the existing trees here on Euclid, that you'll be able to do that and look underneath that canopy.
Great, thank you, Matt. Just want to highlight a couple of other comments and questions we've gotten as we near the end of our time today. Speaking of accessibility, there was a concern mentioned about pedestrian access across the major roadways that we know are in this area. A great comment and something we'll take a further look at in terms with our transportation director in terms of crosswalk enhancements that we could investigate. Also, speaking of our transportation director, I do want to highlight that we do have a transportation resource in Hugo in the Circle, hugointhecircle.com, which has information about parking nearby as well as transit, biking route, shuttle, and transit information. There was also a comment here, Matt, about really strongly wanting to see enhancement of natural features here, including be concerned with what's planted and whether or not that may need fertilizer and further degrade the quality of the brook that we're trying to enhance. So can you comment in terms of the kind of landscape plan and maintenance plan and whether or not, to the extent it includes native plants? There's a question from our audience member about that.
Yeah, I see the question, and I think generally the answer is that our goal as designers, Sasaki works all over the world, and every time we start a new project, we enter into a new context, and so we're always cognizant of that, and we're always trying to make sure that ultimately what's designed is designed in context with the place we're working, and so certainly we would want to do that here as well. One of the things that we are really excited about as an opportunity is these bioswales. This one here at the southern end, there's one here at the northern end, and then there's also one on the triangle parcel. We really see those as really important performative pieces of the landscape that are all planted with native emergent vegetation that will actually act as the filters to take all the pollutants, or not all, but most of the pollutants out of all the stormwater that falls on the site before we release the filtered water back into the brook below. And so that's exactly kind of part of the strategy here, but the details about specific plant species, that's all stuff to come. And certainly we would agree that to the extent we can, we'd like to plant native or adapted species as much as we can here throughout this entire corridor. And that's consistent. I should also say that that's consistent with what our approach has been on all of the other adjacent projects that we spoke of north of Euclid as well. That's been generally the strategy on those projects as well.
Thank you, Matt. And the final comment I'm seeing is also that in thinking about improvements to this space, interpretation, there's a real opportunity for interpretation of the historic and natural elements. I'll highlight that we do have a number of our Circle Walk story poles in the area, which is a 40-point interpretive signage program that you can learn more about the history of the area. There's also a final question here before we wrap out. I know we're looking at 6:30 about the entity responsible for maintenance. I will use this to thank the Cleveland Museum of Art again for their maintenance of that triangle parcel, where again, the first stages of improvement will go, and that will be maintained by the Cleveland Museum of Art. In terms of the vision for the area south of Euclid, that area is currently maintained by the City of Cleveland, and as improvements are able to move forward in that space, that is a question that will have to be answered, but is not determined yet. Jeffrey, I saw you unmute. Do you want to comment on the maintenance question? Accept gratitude.
No, you covered it very well. In fact, when we began this project, I wasn't sure why we'd been mowing that area across from the Fine Arts Garden for since 1923. But it is the museum's responsibility.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you to our panelists. Thank you again to all of our attendees for joining us on this very, very snowy Cleveland evening. We will again follow up with the link if you'd like to access the presentation afterwards, but thank you again, and feel free to reach out with questions if they occur to you later. So thank you, and good evening, everybody.